Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. This video is a lot of fun because it's part of a Heffy Doodle Blog hop to celebrate their newest release. This is their May 2021 release and it's filled with tons of new cute stamps, lots of fun new interactive dies and essential dies and stencils and everything. So I'm so excited to be sharing some of their products with you today, and without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting by blending a panel, and this is using one of the new stencils from this release. It's called the Highlander stencil, and it's this beautiful tartan pattern. I just think it's so gorgeous, and what I'm doing is I'm blending on 3 different colors of distress oxide ink. The 3 colors I'm using are blue, which is Stormy Sky, pink, which is Tattered Rose, and purple, which is Dusty Concord. And I'm just using my ink foam blending tools to blend that right onto the panel of cardstock through that beautiful stencil. And in places where I have too much ink, I'm just using a piece of scrap paper to hold it in place. I taped that panel onto the back of the stencil just to hold that paper to the stencil as well, without kind of interfering with any of the pattern. And I'm really just dabbing on sort of chunks of color, not really worrying about having it be any sort of organized pattern or anything. I really just wanted it to be sort of blobs of color. You can see when I pull the stencil off, you get that beautiful tartan pattern. Now off camera, I went ahead and did some die cutting with the slider pop-up die that is also new to this release. So I die cut my tartan pattern piece with that overall die which cuts the notch in, which you'll see in a moment. And then I cut a piece of blush pink cardstock using this sort of pull tab die. This will be the pull tab as part of the mechanism. And you can see that the die isn't complete. That's just so that the die could kind of fit into the set seamlessly. So all you have to do is use your trimmer, your paper trimmer, to cut that straight line across the edge there, and then you get that rectangle piece. This is going to be the back piece. So this is just a piece of white cardstock cut to the same size as the front panel, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I just use my paper trimmer to cut out a white piece of that size, and I'm going to use this notch die to cut a notch into that piece off camera. So I've gone ahead and done that, and you can see it cuts out this sort of back piece that has the notch in it. The notch die I used here is not part of the set. That actually comes with a different die set called the Slimline Pull Tab die set. So I just used that. You don't have to use that. If you don't have that die set, you could just cut your own little notch into the back. You won't really see it because it's the back. So you can cut it with scissors or just cut a little notch, a triangle, anything like that. The whole point is really just to kind of have some space on that back piece so that your pull tab can be grabbed quite easily. Now this backing piece is also the piece that will kind of you'll see through as you pull the pull tab up. So once you pull the slider pull tab up, this back piece will peek through. And for that reason, you'll want to sort of do any stamping or inking on this piece before you put the whole thing together. So I've gone ahead and used that same Highlander stencil with some light blue ink. This is tumbled glass, and I just added a little bit of ink blending to that piece. So once I've done that, I'm ready to put the mechanism together. I flipped over my front panel, which had that original multicolored tartan pattern on it, and I'm just lining up where my pull tab will go, and you just want to center it so that the top of the pull tab is lined up with the top of your panel. You can choose either side of the pull tab. You'll notice that one side has those straight corners, or I guess jagged corners from where you cut it, and the other side has rounded corners from the die. And you can choose whichever side you want to be on the top. I chose the rounded corners. You can see my cat is getting very involved in this process. She was very intrigued by this whole thing, so she is joining us for this portion of the video. So what you want to do is once you've got that pull tab lined up where you want it to be, you just add foam around the edges onto the back of that front panel. So I just used these thin foam strips and I've put them all along the edges, the sides and the bottom. You also want to add one piece to the bottom of the pull tab itself, and this is where your pull tab will stick. So I'm just pulling that off and I'm going to stick my pull tab onto that piece. Again, this is the bottom of the piece that moves. So what you want to do is you just line up your pull tab with the top of the panel. I'm just lining it right up here, and then when you put it down, as long as everything beneath it is flat, it should stick right down onto that foam tape that you just laid onto that piece. Now it doesn't pull very well right now because it really needs to be anchored to that back piece. So the next step is to anchor it down. So what I'm doing is I'm just releasing the release paper from these foam strips around the edge, and then I can stick that whole panel down onto the back panel. So once I do that, you'll see that everything is nicely anchored, and you can pull that pink pull tab up and it'll sort of fold that slider piece up and reveal what's behind. So I'm just making sure this is nicely lined up, and of course this is the moment that my cat decides she needs extra pets and walks back and forth right in my line of view, but I did manage to get it nicely lined up so that the back piece is lined up and stuck onto the front piece. And then when you pull that pink pull tab, you can see that whole front part kind of folds up and you see what is beneath, which is that blue blended piece. I'm going to be adding a sentiment in there after that's die cut, but if you did want to do any stamping there, you should have done that before you put it together, just to make it a little bit easier to get the right stamping. Now, if you do have that slimline pull tab die set, like I mentioned, you can also add this little sort of tab piece to indicate that the recipient should pull on that pull tab. If you don't have this other die set, so again, this piece does not come in the slider pop-up die set, it comes in the separate slimline pull tab die set. If you don't have that one, you could just draw an arrow, you could stamp an arrow, you can use really anything you have. I've made this type of card already before, and I just drew an arrow, and it looks perfectly fine. Okay, so now that the main sort of mechanism and backbone of the card is built, I'm going ahead and stamping out and coloring all of the images that I'm going to use on this card. And I chose to use one of the new stamp sets from this release. This is called Popping By, and it comes with a bunch of cute sort of popping themed images, I guess. So you've got a box, a cake, and then something that I didn't stamp out for this card is you also have an open box. So I've stamped out the present box, but there's also sort of like an open box that these little critters could be popping out of. And then you get the little critters that are just sort of their heads and their little arms sticking up, so it looks like they're hanging over the edge of something, which I think is so cute. So I stamped all these images out with some Copic-friendly black ink, and now I'm coloring them in with my Copic markers, which is my favorite way of coloring. I find it just kind of simple and easy and straightforward, sort of fail-proof for me. But you can really use any method of coloring here that you want to add color to these images. I'm going to go ahead and play some music while I finish coloring in all of these images that will go on the card. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the coloring process. If you're not interested in watching all of the coloring, of course you can skip ahead in the video and watch the rest of the card come together at the end. Okay, so I finished with the coloring and I've gone ahead and die cut these cute images out with the coordinating dies off camera, so they're all ready to go. I'm starting by just adhering together the pieces that need to be glued together. So I'd put the little hat on the fox, and then I put him onto his present or her present. And I'm doing the same for the mouse, where I'm just gluing the mouse onto the top of the cake, and then I'm adding the little topper onto the top of the mouse's head. And that is a little cake topper, which makes it look like the mouse is truly part of the cake, which I just think is so adorable. Just using some liquid glue for this and holding the pieces together with my tweezers to make sure that they're really stuck. Once that's done, I can arrange them onto my card and start adhering them down. But before I do that, I'm going to just finish off by stamping out a sentiment to go on the front here. And this is from another new stamp set that is part of this release that has a couple different wavy banner shapes and then some sentiments that will fit in them. So I stamped out hip hip hooray in black onto some white paper just to kind of add a little bit of a sentiment onto the front of this card. Now I can start gluing down all the elements onto the card, and the important thing to remember when you're doing this on this type of card is to just make sure that nothing is stuck past the fold point. So I'm just making sure that my glue on these critters is about halfway down and not above that. And this is so that when you pull that slider up, the images will pop up too. So anything that would be folded over, you don't want to be stuck down because that will inhibit your folding action from happening. If you have this at home, kind of try it out and you'll see what I mean. It's hard to explain, but I think once you get this done, once you start working with it, it will become very obvious. So what I'm doing with these parts of the images that are going to be above that fold line is I'm just adhering them together. So that banner, I just adhered to the back of the little party hats on the animals, and the balloons, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just adhering them to the back of the banner and the animals as well. And that way they're not actually stuck down to the panel, they're stuck to each other and they form this sort of unified image that pops up when you pull the pull tab. I'm just finishing off the card by finishing the inside. So like I said, I'm adding a die cut sentiment. This is another new part of the latest release. This is a happy birthday shadow die cut. So you can cut out the words happy birthday, which I've cut out of this light yellow cardstock, and then you can cut out the shadow, which I cut out of white cardstock. And then you can glue on the words onto the shadow and you get this really nice white sort of bubbly outline around the words, which I think makes them pop really nicely, especially on that inked patterned background. So I was just making sure that the slider would actually work over these die cuts, and it does. It gets snagged a little bit sometimes, but it's not too bad. You can kind of just jimmy it and it'll go right over those die cut words perfectly fine. So I think that's okay. I wouldn't stack too many die cuts into this sort of pop-up area, just because you don't want to give your slider too much trouble, but one level of die cut seems to be okay. Okay, so that is the final card. This is how it works in action. When you pull that nice pink pull tab, the images pop right up and you see that message revealed beneath, which I just think is so adorable, and this would be so much fun for the recipient to kind of get that surprise message. The slider pop-up part does stick up if you folded it properly and the folds are good. It doesn't stick up forever for me. I kind of like it that way. I like that when you let it go, it just lays flat, and when you pull it, you get the surprise. So you can kind of make it either way. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to check out all of the other stops on this hop, which are linked down in the video description below, and you'll see lots of other inspiration using all of the products from this release. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!